The candles burned down faster than he expected, thin rivers of wax pooling on a chipped plate that had seen too many quiet meals. The apartment was silent except for the hum of an old refrigerator and the ticking clock that never forgot the passing of time. He sat there alone on his birthday, a single dad in a world that had stopped clapping for him years ago, wondering how a life so full of love once could feel so painfully empty now. He did not know that before the night ended, 3 small whispers would crack open his loneliness and rewrite everything he believed about family, healing, and second chances. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that find us when we least expect them. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them. His name was Daniel Harper, and birthdays had not meant much to him since the night his wife died. She had been laughter and warmth, the kind of person who made ordinary days feel worth celebrating. When she was gone, birthdays became reminders of survival rather than joy, markers of time endured instead of milestones celebrated. Daniel was raising his 6-year-old son Noah on a warehouse supervisor's salary, balancing exhaustion and responsibility like a tightrope walker with no net. Every day started before sunrise and ended long after Noah fell asleep, Daniel staring at the ceiling, counting worries instead of sheep. That evening, Noah was away at a sleepover hosted by a kind neighbor who insisted Daniel deserved a break. The idea of an empty apartment felt worse than the idea of being tired, but Daniel accepted, knowing Noah needed joy that did not come wrapped in his father's fatigue. He bought himself a small cake from the discount bakery on the corner, one with uneven frosting and misspelled words that did not quite spell his name right. He lit the candles, closed his eyes out of habit, and made no wish at all because wishing had started to feel like tempting disappointment. The building he lived in was old, the kind that carried the echoes of other lives in its walls. It had once been a family complex, then slowly turned into a temporary place for people passing through harder chapters. That night, the hallways were unusually alive with the sounds of movement, small footsteps, and hushed adult voices. Daniel noticed it but paid little attention, assuming new tenants were moving in or out, as they often did. Across the hall, a young woman named Clara had moved in just 2 weeks earlier with 3 identical little girls. The girls were triplets, all wide-eyed and curious, with matching curls that bounced when they walked. Clara was not their mother in the traditional sense. She was a foster caregiver, doing what she could for children who had already learned too much about instability. The girls had been removed from a neglectful home and were still learning what safety felt like. They watched everything, absorbed emotions like sponges, and whispered secrets to one another as if the world might overhear and take them away again. Earlier that evening, the triplets had noticed Daniel carrying a cake box. They had watched him through the narrow gap of their door, curiosity flickering behind their eyes. Birthdays were familiar concepts to them, but rarely joyful ones. Their own had been forgotten more than once, marked by silence instead of celebration. Something about the loneliness in Daniel's posture spoke to them in a language they understood far too well. Daniel had just finished washing the lone plate when a soft knock echoed through the apartment. It startled him, not because he feared danger, but because he had not expected anyone to remember him at all. He opened the door to find Clara standing there, flustered and apologetic, explaining that the girls had insisted on seeing him. Before Daniel could respond, 3 small figures peeked out. From behind her legs, their faces serious with a sense of purpose that felt almost ceremonial. The girls stepped forward, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on Daniel as if he were part of a very important decision. In voices barely above a breath, they shared an idea they had clearly rehearsed among themselves. They believed birthdays should not be spent alone, and they believed adults sometimes needed pretending more than children did. They asked, in their own fragile way, if he would allow them to pretend he was their mom for the night, not because they were confused about who he was, but because they wanted him to feel what it was like to be surrounded by care again. Daniel did not cry immediately. The moment was too surreal, too tender. He felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he had carried for years finally giving way. Clara watched from behind them, tears already forming, understanding that this was not childish play, but an offering of empathy from children who had learned to survive by noticing pain in others. They moved into Daniel's apartment like a small burst of life. The triplets sat around the table, their legs swinging, eyes fixed on the cake as if it were something sacred. Daniel relit the candles, and this time, when he closed his eyes, he felt warmth instead of emptiness. The girls clapped softly, careful not to be too loud, and their smiles were not perfect or carefree, but they were genuine. For the first time in years, Daniel felt seen. Over the next few weeks, something quietly transformed in that hallway. The triplets waved at Daniel every morning. They drew pictures and slipped them under his door, crayon hearts and stick figures that looked suspiciously like him. Noah returned from his sleepover and immediately noticed the change in his father. The way his shoulders sat a little higher, the way laughter returned in small, cautious bursts. He met the girls and was instantly enchanted, finding in them playmates who understood the language of imagination and resilience. Daniel and Clara began talking more, sharing coffee in the hallway, swapping stories of exhaustion and hope. Clara spoke of the system, of how hard it was to give children love knowing it might be temporary. Daniel spoke of grief, of raising a child while still missing being a husband. Their conversations were not romantic in the traditional sense, but they were intimate in a way that comes from mutual understanding. The triplets continued their pretending, sometimes calling Daniel their honorary mom for the day, sometimes declaring Noah their brother for imaginary adventures. Daniel never corrected them. He understood that pretending was how they processed reality, and how he was learning to heal. He found himself cooking bigger meals, leaving his door open, allowing laughter to spill into spaces that had been quiet for too long. One evening, the girls' caseworker visited. There was talk of permanent placement, of the possibility that the triplets might soon move again. The news hung heavy in the air. Daniel watched the girls that night as they played, noticing the way they stayed close to him, the way their eyes searched his face for reassurance. He realized then that what had started as pretending had become something rooted deeper, something neither fragile nor temporary. Weeks later, a meeting took place that Daniel never imagined himself attending. He sat in a small office, hands folded, heart pounding, listening to words like guardianship and stability. He spoke honestly about his life, his limitations, and his love. He did not present himself as a savior or a solution, only as a man who had room in his heart and home for children who had already taught him how to live again. The decision was not immediate. There were evaluations, paperwork, long nights of waiting. Through it all, the triplets continued to show up at his door, continuing their ritual of togetherness, continuing to remind him that family is sometimes chosen in moments of quiet bravery rather than born from certainty. On another birthday, 1 year later, the apartment looked different. The walls were covered in drawings. The table was crowded. Noah was older, taller, louder. The triplets were there too, no longer pretending, their place in the room as natural as the air they breathed. Daniel stood back for a moment, watching the chaos, the life, the love, and felt tears well up again, not from sadness, but from gratitude. If this story is touching something deep inside you, if it reminds you of the power of small acts and unexpected connections, please take a moment now to like, share, and engage with this video. Your interaction helps stories like this find others who need them. And before this story ends, I have one special request. Please comment below with the word kindness if you believe that love can show up in the most unexpected ways. Daniel never forgot that first lonely birthday. Not because it hurt, but because it marked the moment his life turned toward light again. He learned that healing does not always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in the form of 3 small girls, brave enough to notice pain, brave enough to offer comfort, and wise enough to know that pretending can be the first step towards something beautifully real.